Okay, ladies and gentlemen, in today's lecture, we're going to talk about the basics of ecology. Okay. Now, ecology at its heart is the study of the environment. As we learned when we were discussing evolution, the environment involves a whole lot of things. Okay. Basically, though, we can split what's in the environment down to two different things. The first one is abiotic factors, and the second one is biotic factors. Okay, so basically what we're doing is we're splitting these things into two categories. Abiotic factors, which are non-living factors, and this is things like water, temperature, minerals, all things that are not living organisms. And then we also have biotic factors, which are living things. And I mean, I could give you a list of what living things are: plants, animals, insects, bacteria, microorganisms, but basically it's everything alive. Okay? Now, when we talk about ecology, what we're really talking about is interrelationships. Actually, let's not even say inter. Let's just say we're talking about relationships. We're talking about the relationships between organisms and the abiotic factors. We're talking about relationships between organisms and other organisms. And there's a lot of ways that these relationships can play out. There are things called predator-prey. Hopefully you have a sense of what that is. Some organisms actually are predators and hunt and eat others. Some organisms are prey. They get eaten by others. Okay. We have parasitism, which is basically when one organism lives off another organism by hurting it. So viruses, even though they're not living, technically would be parasites because they live off you without your help. Any kind of bacteria that infects you would be a parasite because it's living off you and not good. Malaria, which we talked about in class the other day, would be a parasite because it lives off you and actually hurts you. Anything that has a relationship like that is what we call parasitism. We also have something called mutualism. Mutualism is when two organisms live and work together and they both benefit the other. A classic example is the remora, which is a fish that sort of like clings to the underside of a shark with this like weird suction cup mouth thing. And while it's doing that, all right, it actually is cleaning the surface of the shark's skin to prevent like bacteria and mold and all kinds of fungus and stuff from taking up residence on the shark's skin and causing disease. What the remora gets out of this is when a shark eats, it's quite messy. There's like flesh and blood and all kinds of animal pieces everywhere, and the remora scoops up the leftovers. So the remora gets to eat without hunting. The shark gets to keep its skin clean without having any kind of real adaptation for it. You have mutualistic relationships with organisms as well. In fact, one that we've mentioned a lot in the last few days is you have E. coli that live in your intestines. Now, you provide those E. coli a constant source of food. The E. coli provide for you a way to break down plant products that you can get minerals out of them that you could not get without the E. coli. Your body lacks the enzymes required to break down plant cell walls. All right, so there's some examples of the relationships that you can have inside the organisms of an ecosystem. Now, what we want to do for starters is we want to talk a little bit about how we organize the relationships between predators and prey. And what we really want to talk about is energy. Every living thing requires energy. And all the energy has to come from somewhere. And so we frequently look at an ecosystem and we try to create a diagram that shows the relationship between energy and organisms that eat other organisms. And when we do that, we call it a food web. And that's what you can see on this diagram here. So in a food web, a couple of basic things. Arrows on a food web, they show the direction of energy movement. Okay? So what that means is if you take a look at this bird right here, energy is going from the bird to the fox. That's what the arrow is showing me. That means that the bird is eaten by the fox. Energy flows from the grains to the bird. That means the bird eats grains. Energy flows from the grasshopper to the bird. That means the bird eats a grasshopper. Okay? That's what the arrows tell us. Interesting fact for you. If this bird eats both the grasshopper and the grains, it's what we call an omnivore, because it's able to eat both plants and animals. Whereas if you take an example like this mouse right here, energy only flows from the grain to the mouse. So the mouse never eats animals. That makes the mouse an herbivore. Then you have an example like the fox. We all know what it says, I assume. So the fox, you'll notice it only has energy that flows to it from rabbits and from birds. So that makes the fox a carnivore because it only eats meat. Okay? So you have this food web, and basically what you're doing is you're tracking the passage of energy from one organism to the next. What you hopefully notice when looking at this diagram is that the carrots, the grasses, and the grains actually don't seem to have any arrows pointing at them. And the reason for that is because these three things are what we call producers. They actually provide the energy for the entire ecosystem. All right, they provide the energy for every other living thing here. And that's why we call them autotrophs. Because they make their own energy, sort of. Hopefully you remember that these organisms, these producers, get their energy from the sun. Now, if the organisms at the bottom of this food web, the carrots, the grasses, the grains, are producers, that makes everything else up here something we call a consumer. And that's because they get their energy only from other organisms. And consequently, they fall into the category of a heterotroph. So you have autotrophs, which are generally plants, and they actually get energy from the sun, and every other organism in an ecosystem gets their energy from the plants. You have heterotrophs who require something else to get their energy from. So they are either getting energy from plants, if they're an herbivore, they're getting their energy from other animals, if they're a carnivore, or they're getting energy from both plants and animals, if they're an omnivore. Okay? So that's the basics of food web and energy transference. A little bit more about the energy, though, before we move on. So you can see over here you got a food web, and you have this plant that's central. You have fungi that's living off the plant, birds that are living off the plant. You have this worm and this sort of insect centipede thing that are living off the plant. And then you have this, fox-like creature that's living off the snake and living off the squirrel, and the squirrel lives off the plant, and the snake lives off the insect. So you can see when you look at this food web that there's going to be a huge issue if you remove something from it, because all of the energy passes from one organism to the next. What we sometimes do is we like to organize this food web into what we call a trophic pyramid. And a trophic pyramid, this term trophic just means energy. So a trophic pyramid basically is just a way for us to show how the amount of energy in an ecosystem decreases. So you take a look here, plants, okay? Plants get some amount of energy from the sun, all right? And so the energy that an ecosystem starts with is 100%. So if the plants get like 100 kilowatts of energy from the sun, although we don't use kilowatts, we'd use like joules or calories. So let's say they get 100 calories. Actually, let's go with 1,000. Let's say they get 1,000 calories from the sun. By the time all of these herbivores have eaten the plants and lived and hunted and run away from predators and found the plants to eat and reproduced, the energy that went from the plants to the herbivores was 100 calories. When you went from plants to herbivores, it was 10%. 10% of that energy was available for the next level of the pyramid. So then, consequently, when these primary predators are eating these herbivores, so these primary predators get their energy from the herbivores who get their energy from the plants, another 10% of the energy gets used. So that means that if I started with 1,000 calories, my herbivores, so this is going to be my producers, my herbivores have access to 100. My primary predators only have access to 10. And then if you look again, you have the secondary predator, and it eats the primary predators. So that means that, again, it's a 10% change. So that means of my original 1,000 calories, only 1 calorie was available for the secondary predator. And so what this means is, the farther you get up the food web, the less energy there is for you to eat. And that's why you tend to find that secondary predators are the organisms on the planet that have the fewest members of their population. Because it takes a whole lot of primary predators and herbivores and plants to support them. That's why you will find that there are a lot of insects on this planet because they eat plants, but there are not a lot of lions because those lions eat like other herbivores. And so the energy level required to feed them is much higher. This is also exactly why people say you should eat less meat and eat more plants, because when you eat more plants, you're actually getting the energy you need to live directly from the plants. So that's only a 90% loss. So, you're getting 10% of the energy that was in those plants. Whereas if you eat cow, you're getting 1% of that energy. Okay? And so it's very important that you understand that when we have an ecosystem, energy is lost as you go up the trophic pyramid. Okay? So that's it for our presentation on the basic